Imagine you are a researcher. You have spent years excavating a 2,700-year-old tomb in the mountains of Western China. You have cataloged the weapons, the wooden offerings, the animal remains. And then you open the last 13 bowls. The chemical analysis comes back. Cannabis. High-potency cannabis. THC levels far beyond anything that grows naturally in this region, not gathered from the wild. Deliberately cultivated, selectively bred, and placed inside a grave so a dead man would have it on the other side. You stare at the results. And then the question arrives, the one that will pull you not 2,000 years into the past, but 12,000. Did ancient humans get high? The answer is yes. Overwhelmingly, undeniably yes. But that is not the story. The story is why. And once you understand the real answer, everything you thought you knew about ancient humanity collapses into something far stranger and far more human than you expected. Here is what the evidence actually shows. Not in one culture, not in one region, not as an accident of geography or climate. Across every continent where humans lived, in civilizations that had absolutely no contact with each other, the same pattern appears with extraordinary consistency. People found plants that altered consciousness, preserved the knowledge of how to use them, protected that knowledge across generations as something essential, as carefully as fire-making, as seriously as medicine. And they were not casual about it. In the ancient Americas, peyote has been found in burial contexts over 5,000 years old. Dried, preserved, carried hundreds of miles from where it naturally grows. Someone crossed a desert specifically to transport a hallucinogenic cactus to a place where it was needed. Not for food. For this. In the Andes, coca leaves appear pressed into the mouths of mummies thousands of years old, placed there by hands shaking with grief. A preparation for a journey no one could map. In ancient India, an entire civilization structured its spiritual life around a drink called soma, described in the oldest Sanskrit texts ever written as something that dissolved the boundary between mortal and divine. Scholars have spent over a century trying to identify what soma actually was. They still have not agreed. Every continent, every era, the same reach toward the same experience. But the site that shattered the timeline most completely was not a tomb or a temple. It was a hole in the ground in southern Turkey that nobody knew existed until 1994. Göbekli Tepe, a circle of massive carved stone pillars, erected at least 11,600 years ago. The carvings are precise. The stones are enormous. Moving them required coordinated human labor on a scale that should not have been possible for the people who built it. Because the people who built it were hunter-gatherers. No cities. No agriculture, no permanent settlements, no writing. By every traditional assumption about what prehistoric people were capable of organizing, Göbekli Tepe should not exist. And when researchers excavated the floors of the enclosures, they found something that added an entirely new dimension to the mystery. Stone vats, large ones, carved directly into the bedrock. Residue analysis revealed fermented grain beverages, beer, brewed in quantities large enough to supply gatherings of hundreds of people. Now here is the detail that stopped archaeologists completely. These people were brewing grain before they farmed it consistently, which means the sequence most people learned in school, humans settle, humans farm, humans eventually discover fermentation, may be backwards. Some researchers now believe the desire to produce mind-altering substances at communal rituals was not a consequence of agriculture. It may have been one of its causes. The most transformative shift in human history, the move from nomadic foraging to settled civilization, potentially driven not by hunger alone, but by the desire to gather, to alter consciousness together, and to touch something beyond ordinary daily life. That idea is still debated. But the stone vats are real. The residue is real. And the timeline does not lie. The people who managed this knowledge were not ordinary members of their communities. They were specialists, and they appear independently, without contact, without shared language, in virtually every ancient culture ever studied. In Siberia, the Amazon, the Arctic, Sub-Saharan Africa, the highlands of Peru, the same role. Always. One person who knew which plants opened which doors. Trained over years. Carrying knowledge passed down through chains of practice stretching back further than anyone could trace. Not performing magic for credulous audiences. Doing something that modern clinical neuroscience is only now finding language for. Then archaeologists excavated the burial sites of the ancient Scythians and found evidence that reframed the entire question of why ancient humans sought these states in the first place. The Scythians were nomadic warriors. Fierce, mobile, feared across the Eurasian steppes around 500 BCE. The Greek historian Herodotus described watching them perform a specific ritual. After a death, they built small enclosed tents over heated stones and threw hemp seeds onto them. The vapor filled the space. The mourners inside, he wrote, howled. For centuries, historians read this as primitive excess. Barbarians using death as an excuse to get intoxicated. Then excavations found the actual sites. The tent frames. The stones. The hemp seeds. Herodotus had been accurate in every detail, but what 2,000 years of dismissal had completely missed was the context. The Scythians only performed this ritual at funerals. Not at victories. Not at feasts. Not at celebrations. Only when someone died. This was not escape from grief. This was technology for moving through grief, built on thousands of years of accumulated human understanding that certain emotional states are simply too large, too obliterating, for ordinary consciousness to navigate. Grief locks the mind. It freezes the system. It traps the sufferer in a loop that language, reason, and time sometimes cannot break. The Scythians knew this the same way they knew everything else they knew, through generations of experience, observation, and inherited knowledge passed through practice. And they built a solution. Think for a moment about what the ancient world actually felt like from inside it. No hospitals. No therapists. No medication. A mother watching her child die of fever in 3 days with nothing to offer but presence. A warrior returning from battle carrying experiences that had no name and no container. A community devastated by a winter that took half its members, and then required to keep moving anyway. These were not smaller losses because they happened long ago. They were identical in weight to losses today. The difference is that ancient people had no institutions to absorb the impact, no professionals to process it with, no pharmaceutical interventions. What they had were plants and the knowledge, refined across thousands of years, of how to use them to reach the parts of the human mind that nothing else could reach. This was not recreation. It was not weakness. It was the most sophisticated psychological tool available. Now consider this. The belief that psychoactive substances are inherently dangerous, morally corrupting, and worthy of legal suppression is not ancient wisdom. It is not something humanity learned from hard experience across millennia. It is almost exactly 100 years old. For the entire span of human history before the 20th century, across every culture that left any record, the same substances now classified as criminal were used as medicine, as spiritual technology, as tools of grief processing and community bonding and medical treatment, and they were not used carelessly. The ritual structures surrounding them were extraordinarily precise. Specific plants, specific doses, specific preparatory practices. Trained guides who understood the terrain and could navigate what the experience produced. Ancient cultures treated these substances the way a surgeon treats a scalpel. With training. With respect. With complete understanding that the tool, misused, causes serious harm. When the 20th century stripped away every element of that system, the training, the ritual container, the guide, the community, the accumulated knowledge, and left only the substance, it did not eliminate the human drive. It just removed everything that had made the drive navigable. And now, quietly, the evidence is pulling science back toward what ancient practitioners understood. At Johns Hopkins University, researchers administered psilocybin, the active compound in mushrooms used in Mesoamerican ritual contexts for at least 1,000 years, to patients with treatment-resistant depression. People who had failed every available medication and therapy. The results from a single guided session produced sustained remission in patients who had found nothing else that worked. The researchers were not spiritual seekers. They were clinical scientists publishing in peer-reviewed journals, following data that kept arriving at conclusions ancient healers had reached through entirely different means. That there are states of human suffering that ordinary consciousness cannot resolve from the inside, and that carefully guided alterations of that consciousness can reach what nothing else does. Return to that tomb in the Pamir Mountains. The researcher staring at the results. 13 bowls. High-potency cannabis. Deliberately cultivated. Deliberately placed inside a grave. This is not the image of a reckless culture burying its vices with its dead. This is a community that understood something about the human mind that took the rest of the world thousands of years to begin recovering. That consciousness has edges. That grief has depths. That fear has thresholds that ordinary thought cannot cross alone. And that sometimes, carefully, intentionally, with the full weight of accumulated human knowledge behind the practice, you need something that can take you further than you can go by yourself. Those 13 bowls were not excess. They were the most serious thing those people owned. And the hunger that filled them, that ancient, unrelenting, profoundly human hunger to move beyond the ordinary limits of the mind, has never left us. It shows up in every era, every culture, every century that has ever tried to suppress it and discovered that the drive runs deeper than any law. Ancient humans got high. But what they were really doing was something humans have never stopped doing. Reaching for something on the other side of what the ordinary day could hold.